Have you ever noticed that money feels incredibly simple right up until the exact moment it doesn't? When you're young, money is practically a joke. You get paid on Friday, you spend it by Sunday, and somehow you still have enough for gas and fast food during the week because, honestly, what were your expenses? Maybe a phone bill, maybe some subscriptions, maybe the occasional late-night pizza. Money was easy, almost suspiciously easy. And then, one day, without warning, the whole thing starts to feel like a math problem you were never taught how to solve. Suddenly, your paycheck disappears faster than your patience on a Monday morning. Bills pop up like unexpected boss fights. Taxes become a puzzle with missing pieces. Meanwhile, everyone around you acts like this is just normal adulthood. Like you're supposed to magically know the difference between a deductible and a dependent, or how mortgages work, or why your credit score suddenly matters more than your actual personality. Here's the part nobody tells you. There's a specific moment in life when money goes from, "Oh, cool, I got paid," to, "Wait, where is all my money going? Why does everything cost more than my sanity, and why does it feel like adult life is one giant subscription plan I never signed up for?" My name is Michael, and I help people understand money the way school never did. Mostly because school taught you how to calculate the angle of a triangle, but somehow forgot to explain how interest works on a credit card. Stay with me, because today we're going to talk about the exact moment money becomes complicated for most people, why it happens, and how to stop it from destroying the next 20 years of your life. Here's the thing. For most people, money gets complicated not when they start earning more, but when life starts demanding more. That's the part that catches everyone off guard. When you first start working, you feel rich. Even if you're earning very little, the freedom is intoxicating. You can buy what you want. You can do what you want. Your expenses are small. Your responsibilities are almost non-existent. But then adulthood hits you like a slow-motion train. And it doesn't hit loudly or dramatically. It hits quietly, through 100 tiny decisions you don't even pay attention to. You start upgrading things without realizing you're upgrading your entire cost of living. Better apartment, slightly nicer car, more outings, more subscriptions, better clothes, because now you need to look professional. None of it feels irresponsible. It all feels normal, expected. And that's how the trap works. One day you're celebrating payday with tacos. The next day your entire paycheck is pre-allocated to bills you barely remember signing up for. And you think, wait, when did life get this expensive? Who approved this? It feels unfair, like someone flipped a switch without telling you. But the truth is, this is exactly how it happens for almost everyone. Money doesn't suddenly get complicated. It slowly becomes complicated while you're not paying attention. Then one day, you check your bank account and realize adulthood has a cover charge, and you've been paying it without noticing. And here's where it gets interesting. It doesn't hit all at once. It creeps in, quietly, sneaky, like lifestyle inflation disguised as maturity. You move out. You furnish your apartment. You buy a car. You start paying for your own insurance. You realize toothpaste isn't free. You start spending money on things you didn't even know existed. Suddenly, your life is filled with these tiny invisible expenses that multiply faster than rabbits. And then one day, you wake up and realize the math no longer adds up. You're making more money than you've ever made in your life, and you feel more broke than ever. And the wild part is, nothing feels like an obviously bad decision while it's happening. Every expense makes perfect sense in isolation. $40 here, $60 there, a little upgrade on your phone plan, a nicer gym because health is important, an Uber because you're tired, a new outfit because you have a work event. None of these things scream financial disaster, but together, they create this slow financial drift that's almost impossible to notice until you're staring at your budget like it personally betrayed you. It's like adulthood hands you a bunch of tiny financial paper cuts, and none of them hurt individually. You barely notice them. But after a while, you look down and realize you're bleeding money from a dozen different places. And the emotional punch is brutal because you're supposed to feel more secure as you get older, more stable, more confident. Instead, you feel like you're sprinting on a treadmill that keeps speeding up without warning. You're finally earning real income, grown-up income, the kind of income teenage you dreamed about. And somehow, you're still wondering if you can afford takeout on a Thursday night. Let me paint a real picture. You're in your mid-20s or early 30s. You're earning a decent salary. You're not rich, but you're not struggling either. You decide you're finally going to be responsible. You get your first adult apartment. not the tiny, weirdly shaped studio with the suspicious carpet you lived in during your college era. No, this one has a dishwasher, a real one, and a fridge with an ice maker. Look at you, living the dream. But here's what you don't realize. This apartment doesn't just cost more in rent. Everything inside of it costs more too. You're not decorating with thrift store finds anymore. You're buying real furniture. You're buying nicer kitchenware. You're paying for renter's insurance, utilities, new dishes, new linens, subscriptions you forgot you signed up for, streaming services, delivery fees, cleaning supplies. Suddenly, you're spending hundreds of dollars each month on things you didn't even know were expenses. And you know what happens next? Your income finally feels too small. Not because it is, but because every new responsibility you add eats a little bit more of that paycheck until eventually nothing is left. But this isn't even the moment. The moment when money truly gets complicated comes later. It's subtle. It sneaks up on you on a random Tuesday afternoon. You're checking your bank account. Everything seems normal, and then it hits you. This isn't working. You're earning real money now, but you're not getting ahead. You're working harder than ever, but your savings barely grow. You're older, wiser, and somehow more stressed than you've ever been. This moment is the financial awakening nobody warns you about. The moment you realize earning more money doesn't automatically mean keeping more money. The moment you realize adulthood comes with a hidden price tag attached to every new decision. The moment when the illusion that everything will eventually make sense completely breaks. And the emotional consequence of this moment is real. Stress, guilt, confusion, a quiet sense of panic you never admit out loud. You start asking questions you've never asked before. Am I doing this wrong? Why does everyone else seem to have it together? Why am I always one inconvenience away from financial disaster? And then comes the punchline. Everyone else is asking the exact same questions. They're just better at pretending they aren't. Let's go deeper. Because every complicated money problem you face as an adult can be traced back to 8 or 10 very predictable turning points in life. These turning points are so common, almost everyone experiences them, but nobody talks about them. So today, we're breaking them down, one by one. Point 1. The moment you get your first real paycheck. Here's where it gets crazy. Most people assume getting paid makes money easier. It actually does the opposite. When you go from earning almost nothing to earning something that looks impressive compared to your teenage years, you experience what psychologists call income shock. It feels like a lot. It feels like more than you need. So you start spending it like someone who believes their future income will only go up. You sign a lease that's a little too expensive. You buy a car with a payment that's a little too high. You justify purchases because you deserve it. Emotionally, it feels like freedom, rebellious freedom, financial adulthood freedom. But the punchline is brutal. You've unknowingly created a lifestyle you can barely afford, and you're stuck maintaining it because it makes you feel successful. Point 2. The moment you move out on your own. This is where people go from "I'm doing fine" to "why is everything so expensive?" faster than they can say utility bill. Real life example. Your first apartment comes with rent you expect, but then everything else hits you. Trash fee, water fee, gas bill, electric bill, internet bill, move-in fees, cleaning supplies, groceries, appliances. You know that meme where someone says they want to be an adult until they realize adults have to buy their own toilet paper? Yeah, that's real. Emotional consequence? You suddenly feel like you're drowning in expenses nobody prepared you for. You're not doing anything wrong. This stage is just financially brutal for everyone. Point 3. The moment you buy your first car. Here's the part nobody talks about. The car isn't the problem. The payments are. Real life example. You sign a $400 monthly car payment because the salesman told you it's affordable, and maybe it is, but you didn't account for insurance, or maintenance, or gas, or the fact that you just committed yourself to paying thousands of dollars in depreciation for something that loses value every single day. Emotional consequence? You feel trapped by a payment you didn't fully understand. Everyone learns this lesson the hard way. Point 4. The moment you start making more money. And this one shocks people because you'd think earning more makes life easier. It doesn't. Real life example. You get a raise, you celebrate, you feel proud. And then somehow, a few months later, you're still broke. Emotional consequence? Shame, confusion. You start thinking, maybe I'm just bad with money. You're not bad with money. Your lifestyle simply rose faster than your income. Point 5. The moment you start paying taxes, you actually notice. Remember when taxes were just this thing that happened in the background? That ends as soon as your income rises enough for you to see how much is being taken out. Real life example. Your gross pay is $60,000, but your net pay is $48,000. Emotional consequence? A mild existential crisis that makes you question why you wake up at 6 in the morning to go to work. Congratulations, you now understand why adults complain. Point 6. The moment you start comparing yourself to your peers, here's where things get interesting. Your financial decisions stop being about what you need and start being about what everyone else is doing. Real life example. Someone you know buys a house, someone else gets married, someone else goes on a vacation, someone else drives a nicer car, and suddenly you feel behind. Emotional consequence? This deep, uncomfortable anxiety that whispers, you're failing. You're not failing. You're just comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. Point 7. The moment you add long-term commitments. A mortgage, a partner, a child. This is the moment money stops being a month-to-month problem and becomes a 40-year problem. Real-life example. A single unexpected expense can now disrupt the next 6 months of your budget. Emotional consequence? Responsibility suddenly feels heavy. Punchline? This is adulthood. Nobody is ready. Everyone is pretending. Point 8. The moment you realize your parents were never as financially secure as you thought. This one hits like a truck. Real life example. You start noticing the cracks, the lack of savings, the medical bills, the retirement uncertainty, emotional consequence, panic. Because now you're not just thinking about your future, you're thinking about theirs. Punchline? Welcome to the generation that has to solve both its own financial problems and the problems it inherited. Point 9. The moment you understand opportunity cost. This is where money goes from simple math to emotional psychology. Real life example. You suddenly realize that every dollar spent on something today is a dollar that won't grow over the next 20 years. Emotional consequence? Financial guilt begins to replace financial ignorance. Punchline? The more you learn about money, the harder it becomes to spend it stupidly. Point 10. The moment you finally accept that nobody is coming to save you, here's the truth. For most people, this realization happens later than it should. Real life example. You're staring at your bills, your debt, your goals, and it hits you. Nobody is going to magically fix this. Not your employer, not your government, not your parents, not your financial advisor. Emotional consequence? Fear, but also clarity. Punchline? This is the moment everything changes, because it's the first moment you start taking money seriously. And this brings us back to the core idea. The moment money gets complicated isn't random. It's predictable. It's structural. It's psychological. It's mathematical. It's emotional. It's the moment your life becomes bigger than your paycheck. The moment adulthood demands more from you than your past self ever planned for. The moment you stop living like a college student and start living like an adult, but without the financial education adulthood requires. But here's the part nobody explains. Money doesn't get complicated because life gets harder. Money gets complicated because the stakes get higher. In your teens and early 20s, financial mistakes cost you tens or hundreds of dollars. Annoying, but manageable. In your 30s and 40s, financial mistakes cost you thousands or tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, and those mistakes can take years to recover from. The emotional weight of money increases, the consequences increase, the fear increases, the responsibilities increase. And here's where it gets interesting. Your financial literacy does not increase on its own. You don't wake up one day knowing how retirement plans work. You don't magically understand compound interest. You don't suddenly know the difference between a high-yield savings account and an index fund. Nobody teaches this stuff unless you go looking for it. Most people only start learning about money after they've already made the mistakes, after they've already signed the loan, after they've already taken on the debt, after they've already locked themselves into financial commitments they barely understood. Which is why the moment money gets complicated feels so sudden. But it isn't sudden. It's the slow accumulation of responsibilities you weren't trained for. Let's zoom in on a real-life example. You get your first real job. You're proud. You finally feel like an adult. HR hands you a stack of forms, retirement accounts, insurance choices, tax documents, benefits packages. And in that moment, you're faced with decisions that will affect your future for decades. And what do most people do? They check the default boxes, not because it's the best option, but because it's the least confusing option. Emotional consequence? You spend the next 10 years wondering why you're not getting ahead despite doing everything right. Punchline? You weren't doing everything right. You were doing everything normal. And normal is exactly what keeps people stuck. We need to talk about the emotional side of money because this is where complexity really shows up. When you're young, money is logical. When you're older, money becomes emotional. You start tying your self-worth to your income. You start tying your security to your savings. You start tying your identity to your lifestyle. Money stops being just money. It becomes a measurement of competence, of success, of stability, of adulthood. This emotional pressure makes even simple financial decisions feel heavy. Should you invest more? Should you save more? Should you buy a house? Should you pay off debt? Every decision feels like it could ruin your future. And this is when most people shut down. They avoid their finances. They stop checking their bank accounts. They ignore their bills. Not because they're irresponsible, but because they're overwhelmed. Emotional consequence? Quiet financial anxiety that follows them everywhere. Punchline? Avoiding money is the fastest way to lose control of it. So what do? How do you simplify money when life keeps making it complicated? The answer is both simple and uncomfortable. You reduce the number of decisions you need to make. You automate everything you can. You prioritize the basics over the noise. You stop trying to optimize and start trying to stabilize. You stop comparing yourself to everyone else and start comparing yourself to who you were a year ago. You accept that you can't control the economy, but you can control your habits. You accept that you can't control inflation, but you can control your spending. You accept that you can't control unexpected expenses, but you can control how prepared you are for them. Money becomes simpler when you stop trying to solve everything at once and start solving the right things in the right order. Here's how wealthy people avoid the complexity trap. They don't rely on memory. They don't rely on motivation. They don't rely on self-control. They rely on systems, automatic investments, automatic savings, automatic payments. They limit the number of financial decisions they need to make each month. They create routines that protect their money instead of routines that drain it. They spend their energy building the financial machine once so that afterward, the machine works for them. Meanwhile, most people spend their entire lives trying to manually push their finances uphill, and then they wonder why they feel exhausted. Let's talk about the harsh reality. Money is simple when your responsibilities are small. Money is complicated when your responsibilities grow faster than your financial skills. And money becomes simple again only when your financial skills grow faster than your responsibilities. That is the shift. That is the moment everything changes. The turning point where money goes from something that controls you to something you control. But the turning point doesn't happen automatically. It happens when you start paying attention, when you start learning, when you start treating your finances with the seriousness adulthood actually requires. The moment money becomes simple again is the moment you stop reacting to your financial life and start building one on purpose. Let's end with this. The complicated moment isn't the problem, it's the signal. The moment money suddenly feels messy, confusing, overwhelming, that's the moment you're officially ready to grow, ready to learn, ready to take control, ready to build a life where money stops being the constant stress in the back of your mind. Because here's the truth. You don't need to look rich. You don't need to impress anyone. You don't need the fancy car or the expensive apartment or the perfect vacation photos. You need stability. You need clarity. You need a system that works. You need a plan that keeps you calm. You don't need to look rich. You need to stop being stressed.